So boot camp number 8. So today we're going to go over some comparative passages. We're going to look at those agree, disagree questions. So if you had a chance to watch that video, excellent. If not, no worries. We're also going to go through some accept questions in that LRBT2 document. Those show up as cannot be true. So any question that has the word accept. And we have a lovely guest here today. We are working with Sriya. So if you took the Intro to Logic Games boot camp, you get to see her again, her beautiful face. And she will be helping us out with those disagree, agree, and the accept questions. Oh, next slide, next slide. So we have, I'm going to schedule a humanities reading comp class sometime on Wednesday. So I will definitely make sure you all are aware of that. Totally free. If anybody has preference on times, let me know, but definitely in the evening. And then our last homework help is coming up on Monday, normal time. We've gotten some requests to cover necessary and sufficient assumptions. So Karshna did a really great job with sufficient assumptions, and I think we probably could have used more time on necessary, so that's my bad. We'll go ahead and tease out what's the difference between necessary and sufficient, and then the different tactics. So with Karshna, you guys learned the plugging things into X and Y, the if X then Y formula, which seemed like it helped. So we'll recover that, and then I'm seeing a lot of flaw questions. So we're probably just going to open up the floor on Monday to look at different flaws and different questions that people have from the homework. I know you guys have been really killing. I think the homework assignment was up to like 100. So you're really just going through these. Very proud of y'all. If there's any other requests, feel free to message me or feel free to bring them to homework help. Any lingering questions there? Comments, concerns? No? Okay. We're quiet today. It's early. We're getting there. So homework, we got some point questions. We got cannot be true questions. That's just Monday, Tuesday. So once we get to Tuesday, we'll give you more homework. But we're going to start moving from more of the, we've been covering a lot of content, and now we're starting to wrap up our LR content. You've pretty much covered the bulk of reading comp content. And so now we're moving more into strategy over the next couple of sessions. So I'm very excited for y'all. I also just want to really affirm you all in seeing the comments in the Google Classroom, seeing all of the road mapping you're doing, all of the wrong answer journals for reading comp and LR. You're doing an excellent job. And so just want to make sure that we take time to acknowledge that you all have wins, and it might not be as big as somebody else's wins, but we're not in the game of comparing ourselves. Each of you has come a really long way. So very proud of y'all. You are an inspiration, truly. So yeah, just wanted to take some time to just thank you all for being super committed and just on the game. Alrighty, so I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Sriya so we can look at some of these questions. But look how far we've come. Today we're looking at disagree and agree questions, and these are all the different questions that you now know. Look at that. All we have left are those parallel reasoning questions, and we're going to get to those I think on our last class or even maybe next week. So we're so close. So today they disagree and agree. That's a top-down question. And then our accept questions, they're usually going to come from a must be true place, but it's fair game on any one of these question types. You basically approach it the same way. You just have to be careful looking for the accept. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and pass it off to Sriya. I can also put up the slides too. Oh, okay, there we go.
Can you guys see this? Can you guys hear me? Okay, awesome. So, okay, for agree and disagree questions, for those of you that watched the video, any takeaways?
I really like the strategy of, well, so it was done differently in the video of looking at one person's um, argument or one person's statement and then figuring out which one was yes and which one was no. But then, like, it eliminated two answers right off the bat. So I thought that was, I've never seen that done before like that.
Yeah, that's a great strategy. Yeah. Whatever the correct answer is, um, one person is going to disagree and one person is going to agree, right? If it's a point of contention between them. And so if we don't know what one person thinks about that answer choice, or if both people agree or something, they feel the same about it, then that can't be our answer choice and we can just cross it out. Yeah. So the correct answer choice, one person agrees, one disagrees. Great. Anything else? Okay. Yeah. Awesome. Sorry, I haven't annotated on slides before, so I need to figure out how to get rid of what I drew.
It's okay. So you would go to the annotate button and then click the eraser or the clear all.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks. Okay, so example question stems for this question type, they might talk about, they might mention whether these two people disagree about something, or they might call it a main point at issue. So the questions could read, the statements above provide the most support for holding that Katie and Jasmine disagree about whether, or the main point at issue between Katie and Akrishna is whether. Um, and then if you look at the rest of them, most of them mention the word disagree, right? And so that you're really looking for something where they feel differently about an issue, and where their points diverge and they have different opinions. So your approach, you want to read the stimulus and understand what both sides are saying. As Tyler said, you could read one and then look through the answer choices, so that just that one is clear in your mind, and okay, like, does this person agree or disagree with this statement, with this statement, with this statement, and just go through all the answer choices. Yeah, anything in each argument can be the evidence. So you want to assume all the statements are true, and then you want to try and figure out how the two people disagree. Um, And then, yes, you want to focus on just one person at a time. That simplifies it, because then you don't have to wonder, oh, wait, I just read this. Did person A say this or did person B say this? And you don't have to flip back and forth as often. If both people agree with an answer, it's not what you want to pick. If both people disagree with an answer, then it's wrong. If one person doesn't say enough for you to know what that person thinks, then that's also not your answer. If you can't figure out whether they agree or disagree, you can cross that one out. And so you just want to keep asking, does this person agree or disagree for each answer option? Okay, here is an example. Does someone want to read this one?
I can.
Okay, awesome.
Do you just want me to read one person or both?
You can read both.
Okay.
Sorry, first read Maria, and then we'll go over the answer options.
Okay. Maria, popular music is bad art because it greatly exaggerates the role love plays in everyday life and thereby fails to represent reality accurately.
Awesome. Okay, so now we can go through the answer options and see whether Maria agrees or disagrees with each of them. So would Maria agree or disagree with A? Most good art creates consoling illusions. Any thoughts? So Tyler, what did Maria say essentially, if you had to summarize it or put it in your own words?
Um, Basically, popular music is bad because it doesn't represent reality.
Exactly. Yeah. So then did Maria say anything about good art and whether it creates consoling illusions?
No, and you can just cross that off, I think, since it doesn't really address it.
Exactly. Maria doesn't address what's going on with most good art, right? The word most here, do we know anything about most or good art? Not really, right? So we can cross out A. And then what would Maria think about B? B says some bad art exaggerates the role love plays in everyday life, right? Would Maria agree with that or disagree with that?
I would say she agrees with that.
Yeah, Maria says popular music is bad art. So, you know, that bad art, the bad art that's popular music, she believes that exaggerates the role um, love plays in everyday life. So I think Maria would agree with that. Okay, and then here we can write Maria. We don't know how she feels about A. Okay, she agrees with B. What about C? Art should always represent reality as it could be, not as it is. Do we know what Maria thinks about art in general, what art should do? Is there a strong word in C? The word always is pretty strong, right? Does Maria say um, anything about art always having to represent reality as it could be, not as it is? Do we know for sure how whether she agrees or disagrees with this statement?
No, because she she thinks it should represent reality, but not as it could. Like she never says as it could be, or that doesn't come up, I guess. Or maybe it does. I don't know.
No, no, no. Yeah, yeah. I don't think it necessarily comes up. The as it could be thing, I mean, maybe, but then, does she think it always has to? We don't know, right? She says it should in this instance, maybe. Um, like with the popular music, she's saying it's bad because it doesn't represent reality, but she never says art always should, right? We don't know whether she would agree with that or disagree with that. Does that make sense? Um, so for that reason, we're not quite sure whether Maria would agree or disagree with this statement. And then D, art need not represent reality accurately to be good art. What do you guys think about that one? D is saying, well, art doesn't need to represent reality accurately for it to be good art.
I think she definitely disagrees with that.
Exactly, right? Her statement is against that, right? Because she's talking about a type of art where she's saying, well, it's bad because it doesn't represent reality. And then the last one, E, popular music should not be considered to be an art form. What do we think about that one? Does Maria say popular music isn't an art form?
She just says it's bad.
Yeah. Does she say anything about whether it should or should not be considered an art form?
No.
No, I don't think we know whether she thinks it should or should not be considered an art form. I guess she considers it an art form because she said it's bad art. Um, so I guess she considers it an art form. So maybe we can put disagree for this, but it doesn't seem it doesn't seem as straightforward as D or B, if that makes sense. And then so for Theo, does anyone want to read what Theo said? Anyone other than Tyler?
Popular music is not supposed to reflect reality. It performs other artistic functions such as providing consoling fantasies and helping people create some romance in their often difficult lives. You should understand popular music before you condemn it.
Yes. Yep. And Sky, if you had to summarize what Theo said or translate it in your own words, what would you say Theo's point of view is?
It sounds like he's just saying to give it a try before like judging it, and that popular music can be a variety of forms and not necessarily like reality.
Yeah, exactly. Theo's saying, well, popular music doesn't have to represent reality. There's other artistic things that it does, such as, and then gives a couple of things that popular music does. So let's look at A again. Oh, we don't have to look at A because we crossed A out. Let's look at B. Some bad art exaggerates the role love plays in everyday life. What do we think about that one? What would Theo say about that? Would Theo agree or disagree that some bad art exaggerates the role love plays in everyday life?
I don't think Theo is talking about that exactly.
Exactly.
So I don't, right.
Yeah. Does Theo ever mention bad art?
No.
No, right? We don't know what Theo thinks about some bad art. So we have no idea what Theo thinks about this. So that cannot be our answer. And then let's read D next. Art need not represent reality accurately to be good art. What would Theo say about that? Would Theo agree or disagree?
It's kind of like the half, because it talks about reflecting popular music is not supposed to reflect reality. But he doesn't necessarily say, good or bad, but it's kind of like so in that answer, I think.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah. Theo's kind of is Theo pushing back against Maria's point? Theo is,
I would
right?
say, yeah, I would say, yeah. I
Mhm.
mean, he's definitely,
Yeah, Theo's pushing back against Maria's point, right? And Maria's point is that, this is what makes popular music bad art. I mean, that's Maria's point, right? This is what makes popular music bad art. And Theo's saying, well, not necessarily, right? So I think D sounds like a pretty good answer. So if we're not sure about it, let's also look at E. Popular music should not be considered to be an art form.
for this one, I would say that, like, I would go back to Maria and I would say, I don't know if she addresses, I think she's just saying, like, popular music is bad art, but she's actually saying it's art.
Exactly.
So I think,
Saying it's art. Yeah. No, completely agree. And I think Theo's
D
also
would be the
saying,
best answer.
could you say that one more time?
No, so I was saying by process of elimination, that D would be the best answer.
Yeah. E, I would say Theo also disagrees because Theo talks about popular music and its artistic functions. So I think both of them would disagree about E. They both see it as art. I think D, yeah, would be our answer. And I think Theo here would agree that good art doesn't necessarily need to represent reality accurately, because that's kind of what Theo's saying, right? Popular music is not supposed to reflect reality. There's still other artistic things that it's doing that are positive. Does that make sense? Does anyone have any questions about this? About this one? Did everyone understand all of the answer options and why we, crossed them out? Are you speaking, Sky? I think you might be muted. Okay. Sounds good. Okay. Moving on. Okay. Would anyone like to read Mark?
The fact that the people of our country look back on the past with a great deal of nostalgia demonstrates that they regret the recent revolution.
Yeah. Okay. So what is Mark saying essentially? Would you guys like to translate, or would anyone like to translate or summarize what Mark thinks?
I think Sky, you can go ahead.
I think that I can't remember what nostalgia means. Maybe like demise.
Yeah, it's okay. If you don't know what nostalgia means, you could even try just covering it up and summarizing without that word. But nostalgia means like thinking back on the past and feeling associated with it.
Happy about it.
Okay, so maybe I think Mark is saying that that there's people who regret the recent revolution.
Yeah, exactly. People think back about the past in our country, and that must mean that they regret the recent revolution that happened. Awesome. And then so let's read our answer options and see whether we think Mark would agree or disagree with them. Okay. A. So we're looking to see whether the dialogue, their dialogue provides the most support for the claim that Mark and Robert agree that the people of their country. So we are actually trying to find something that they both agree on. Does that make sense? So we want to find something where Mark agrees and Robert also agrees. So let's look at A. The people of their country tend to underrate past problems when the country faces troubling times. What do we think about that?
I don't like it.
Yeah, I also don't like it. Do we know what people tend to do when the country faces troubling times? Mark didn't really talk about that, right? So I don't know what Mark thinks about A. And then what about B? The people of their country are looking to the past for solutions to the country's current problems.
I would
It
argue.
doesn't talk about. Oh, go ahead. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
No, I was gonna. Yeah, you're right. I think like it doesn't address that.
Yeah, exactly. Solutions to the country's current problems. It doesn't really talk about that, right? So we don't know about B. What about C? The people of their country are likely to repeat former mistakes if they look to the country's past for solutions to current problems.
I don't think they're talking about that. I don't like it. I don't think.
Yeah, I don't quite like this one either, right? Are likely to repeat former mistakes. Mark doesn't mention anything about something being likely. So I don't know if that's our answer either. And then let's look at D. D says the people of their country are concerned about the country's current situation, and this is evidenced by their nostalgia.
I like the way D sounds, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think would you say Mark agrees or disagrees with D?
Agree.
Yeah, I agree as well. Yep. So Mark basically said something very, very similar, right? Mark is saying, well, I think that they regret the recent revolution. And that kind of lines up with them being concerned about the country's current situation, right? And D is also saying, well, the evidence for this is their nostalgia. Mark also says the nostalgia demonstrates this. So D sounds great. Let's look at E. The people of their country tend to be most nostalgic for the things that are farthest in their past. What do we think about E?
Not liking the word farthest.
Right? Yeah. We don't know what, Mark thinks about things that are farthest in their past. He just talks about the past in general. And so this is also not a great answer. So this one's kind of easy, right? What's probably our answer here?
D.
Yeah, our answer is probably D, and we didn't even have to read what Robert said, but let's go back to read what Robert said. Does anyone want to read Robert really quickly?
I can.
They-
They are not nostalgic for the recent past, but for the distant past, which the pre-evolutionary regime despised. This indicates that although they are troubled, they do not regret the revolution.
Awesome. So then, does what Robert said align with D as well? Robert says they are troubled, right? And that aligns with the first part of D, um, being concerned about the country's current situation. Um, because they are troubled about what's going on. And then Robert says they are nostalgic, but it's not for the recent past, but for the distant past. But Robert also acknowledges that people are nostalgic in general. Does that make sense? So for this one, we didn't even have to go through both people. One person was enough, and D was the answer here. Okay. Next question. Okay. Would anyone like to read Richard?
I'll read it. Because it fails to meet the fundamental requirements of art, that if that it present abstract art will eventually be seen as an aberration.
Okay. So if do you guys think there's a conditional statement in there?
If present or something, that it present.
No.
Okay.
I thought it said if. Mhm.
They mentioned that representing is a fundamental requirement of art, right? Does that make it a necessary condition?
Maybe.
Yeah, it does. You don't have to write it out as a conditional statement, but there is a conditional statement there. They're saying, hey, if it's art, then it has to represent, right? But yeah, so Richard is saying, well, if it's art, it has to represent, right? Then Richard is saying, well, abstract art, what is Richard implying about abstract art?
That it doesn't represent.
Exactly. Richard is saying that it fails to meet that requirement, right? So Richard is saying, well, abstract art doesn't represent, and that's why it'll be seen as an aberration. Even if we didn't know what this word meant, does it mean something good or bad, do we think?
Say that again.
Yeah. So Richard is saying that abstract art fails to meet this requirement of art, and art should represent.
Mhm.
So that means that abstract art, if it fails to meet this, that means that it doesn't do a good job of representing.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. And then Richard goes on to say, well, that means that abstract art will eventually be seen as an aberration. Does that probably mean something good or bad if it failed in some way?
Something bad.
Yeah. So he's basically saying, well, it'll be seen as something not great, right? And then let's see. So for this question, we're trying to see what Richard and Jung Soo disagree over. Let's go over the answer options. A, makers of abstract art reject literal representations. What would Richard say about that?
He didn't say anything about it.
Okay. What did we, so okay, does someone want to summarize what Richard said? I know it was kind of complicated and it was wordy and like condensed.
I think he's saying that abstract art isn't real art because it doesn't meet the fundamental requirement of art, which is to represent.
Yeah, so he's saying abstract art doesn't represent, right? If it's abstract art, let's call that AA. Then it doesn't represent, right? And then if it's art in general, it should represent. Right? Does that make sense? And then so do we know what Richard thinks about the makers of abstract art?
No.
No. So I don't know if Richard would agree or disagree with that, right? Because Richard talks about the art itself. And he thinks that the art itself doesn't do a good job of representation, but maybe the makers do reject, maybe they don't reject representation, we don't know. So let's look at B. The fundamental requirement of art is that it represent.
I like it.
Yeah, I also like it. Yeah. Richard, does Richard agree with this statement or disagree with the statement?
He disagrees with it.
He disagrees?
Oh, never mind. He agrees. He's just saying abstract art.
Yeah.
A requirement, but he agrees with that term or that statement.
Okay. Yep, perfect. He agrees with this term and feels like abstract art doesn't fit into this. Awesome. So he agrees. Richard said, sorry, I just have to move this little bar thing. Okay, Richard said, the fundamental requirement of art is that it represent, right? So B seems like it could work. Let's look at C. Musicians may reject literal representation.
Musicians?
Yeah, musicians. Did Richard even mention musicians?
No.
No.
Sriya, I have a question. So looking at the agree and disagree, so both of them basically need to mention the same thing for me to be able to say, hey, although so one may, because I see on the second one where it says may reject, but although Richard's not talking about it, both of them have to be talked about essentially is what you're saying.
Yes, because do we know how Richard feels about musicians?
No.
No. Yeah, if Richard came second, could Richard refer back to musicians without saying the word musicians? Maybe, right? If Richard was just talking about all artists, then musicians could fall under that, right?
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, but we don't know what musicians might or might not do, right? So even sometimes could an answer be correct even if one person doesn't mention that specific word? Yes, but then that specific word would have to fall under like a bigger category of something that's mentioned. Does that make sense? It would have to be like a synonym in some way.
That makes sense.
Awesome. And then D, abstract art will be seen as an aberration.
Richard agrees with that.
Yeah, Richard says that, right? So Richard agrees. And then E, abstract art is representational.
Yes.
Okay, does Richard agree with that or disagree with that? If it's abstract art, does it represent?
Oh no,
According to Richard, no, right?
it fails.
Yeah, Richard is saying if it's abstract art, it doesn't represent. So Richard would disagree with E, right?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So we know two things that Richard would agree with, one thing that Richard would disagree with. Let's look at Jung-Soo. Would anyone like to read what Jung-soo is saying?
I don't mind. Although artists, like musicians, may reject literal representation, makers of abstract art choose to represent the purely formal features of objects, which they are discovered only when everyday perspectives are rejected. Thus, whatever others might come to say, abstract art is a part of the artistic mainstream.
Okay, so what is Jung-soo saying? Would anyone like to translate his main idea or thoughts?
Musicians,
I think
musicians,
disregard.
go ahead.
No, go. Okay. Like disregarding the musician's part, I don't think that, like from what we know already, basically they're saying that abstract art follows or represents formal features of like of an object, so they do represent something, and so they can be considered an art form, and they
Yeah.
meet that fundamental requirement.
Exactly. So does Jung-soo think that artists do, I mean, does Jung-soo think that abstract art does represent?
Yes.
Yeah, it's kind of hidden in there, right? The word represent does show up here. And Jung-soo is saying, well, makers of abstract art choose to represent. So he's saying there is some sort of representation in there. It's just of the really formal features of objects. And then Jung-soo is also saying artists may reject literal representation, right? So they might choose to reject a certain way of representing, but they're representing things in a different way, is what Jung-soo is saying. So understanding that, let's look back at B, D, and E. B, the fundamental requirement of art is that it represent. What would Jung-soo say about that?
I think I probably agree with it.
Do we know what Jung-soo thinks is a fundamental requirement of art? Or does anyone know what fundamental requirement means?
It represents makers of abstract
Something that's needed or something that is important.
Yeah, exactly. It's something that's needed or important. So it's often when it shows up on the LSAT, it means it's a necessary condition, right? Fundamental means you need it. So did Jung-soo say that representation was a fundamental requirement of art?
No.
I don't think he directly did, but I do agree that I feel like Jung-soo would agree with it, because he's kind of agreeing with Richard about that part as in the way that he's speaking. But if he would agree with it, it's not our answer, right? Because then they would both agree with it.
Right.
But we don't know whether, I would say we don't directly know whether Jung-soo thinks that it's a fundamental requirement of art. We don't know, what Jung-soo would say about something that doesn't represent, if that makes sense. Does that make sense, Tyler?
Yeah, it does.
Okay, so I would probably put a question mark here, but even if not, if it was agreed, they would both be agreeing. And then let's look at D. Abstract art will be seen as an aberration.
No.
No, we don't know what Jung-soo thinks about the future, right? And, Jung-soo does say abstract art is part of the mainstream, but if it's part of the mainstream, can it still be seen as negative? We don't know,
Yeah.
right? So question mark there. What about E? Abstract art is representational.
He agrees with that. I think that's the right answer.
Exactly. And this is a simpler answer, right? Like, this is pretty basic. And it's the easiest thing to find in the both of them, right? Richard is saying, you know, it fails to represent, and then Jungsu is saying, well, not necessarily. They're not representing certain things, but they are representing others, right? So E would be our answer here. Does anyone have any questions about this one? Okay. Moving on, one more. Okay. Would anyone like to read Rachel? Or would you guys like to do this one and then come back to discuss it? Come back together to discuss it?
You can come back.
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. Let me know if you guys have any questions along the way. I'll set a timer for a couple minutes. Would you guys like some more time?
Yes, just a few more minutes.
Okay, sounds good.
I'm ready.
Okay. Are you guys ready to go over the question? Okay, sounds good. So what were your guys' thoughts? Do you guys were you guys able to pick an answer?
Yes.
Okay, what do you think the answer is?
I said A.
Yeah, I think it's A as well. What about did anyone else get a different answer?
I like to A too, but then I
And what's
also I like to A, but then I was looking at B.
Yeah, let's look at B. And then any other answer choices that people want to look at? Okay, let's start with B then. Contemporary artists are bound by the same constraints as their predecessors. So that's just saying, okay, the artists today, they have similar restrictions as people used to have, right? What would Rachel say about that?
That they don't.
she would
She said
disagree.
free. Yeah, she said they're free.
Rachel would disagree about that point, right? Rachel, yeah, exactly. Rachel is saying that they're free of these constraints that people used to have. What would James say about contemporary artists and their restrictions?
I don't think James addressed it.
Yeah, I don't think James said anything about it specifically, right? Did James say anything about, artists today and artists in the past? Yes, but did James talk about their restrictions or their constraints? Not really, right?
No.
Right. And I don't even think it's about artists today and artists in the past. I think it's about art today and art in the past, right?
Mhm.
Is what James is talking about. So I think James isn't really talking about artists necessarily and the restrictions that they faced. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so I don't think we would know what James really thinks about B. Did anyone have any other hesitation or questions about C, D, or E? Okay, let's go over A really quickly then. Contemporary art is of lower quality than earlier art. What would Rachel say about that?
She would agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, Rachel would agree.
This freedom has caused the decline in the quality of art.
Exactly. Rachel is saying over time, the quality of art has gone down. And then what is James saying about A? How would James feel about A?
People today mistakenly think that contemporary art is generally inferior to earlier art. So he's saying that people are wrong.
Exactly.
Meaning that, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Meaning that it's actually superior. He thinks that it's superior.
Yeah, do we know that he thinks it's superior?
Or just that others mistake it for it being inferior, which
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, he's saying it's not necessarily inferior, right? He's saying people are harshly judging or more harshly judging the art of their own time, right? So James is saying you're being unfairly critical of the art today, the art of today. It's a mistake to think that, art today is inferior to art of the past. So James is saying maybe not necessarily to what Rachel is saying, right? So James is disagreeing. Yep. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yes.
Okay. Any questions about this one? Okay, sounds good. I'm gonna pass it back to Jasmine.
Yay! Fantastic job, y'all. So we're gonna go ahead and take a good, how long do we need? I know it's early. I know it's been a rough week for a lot of people. Let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break. Feel free to, shut your cameras off, and we'll come back at 10, well, it's 11 o'clock in Eastern, so 11:45, is that right? 35, 10 minutes from now, wherever you are. And then we're going to go ahead and jump into comparative passages. So this is actually going to fit really well with what you just did with Sriya. I'm super excited. Or if people want to lounge here, that's totally cool. I'll be here, but no pressure. Thank you, Sriya. You're so amazing.